I never thought betrayal could come dressed as love, but there it was, staring back at me in black and white. The credit card statement lay open on my kitchen table like a wound that refused to heal, each line of numbers cutting deeper than the last. $17,000. Not groceries, not a medical emergency, not anything resembling necessity. No, it was wedding flowers, catering deposits, venue fees, every expense neatly charged to the card I had foolishly added Zoe to 4 emergencies 3 years ago. My daughter's dream wedding built on my teacher's pension and what was left of Donald's life insurance. I traced my finger over the itemized charges, every figure a small betrayal. Enchanted Gardens florist, $3,200. Bella Vista Reception Hall, $8,500. Morrison's Catering, $4,800. The numbers blurred as my eyes welled, but I forced the tears back. At 62, I should have known better. By now, I should have learned that my children's love came with a price tag attached. The house groaned around me, cavernous and empty, filled only with the echoes of a family that had slowly, deliberately erased me from their lives. Donald's reading chair still sat by the window, untouched. For years had passed since he was taken from me, yet I had preserved everything exactly as it had been the day he died, partly from grief, partly from the desperate hope that maintaining the familiar might somehow keep me tethered to a time when I mattered. The phone buzzed against the granite countertop, the same countertop Donald had surprised me with on our 20th anniversary. A text from Zoe lit the screen. "Hey Mom. Can you pick up some groceries for us? Running late from wedding stuff. Just the usual. Thanks." The usual. As if I were her hired help. As if the $17,000 I had unknowingly funneled into her fantasy meant nothing. As if I meant nothing. I set the phone face down and stared again at the statement, running calculations in my head. My pension was $2,800 a month. After the mortgage, utilities, and groceries, I might have $400 left. At this rate, paying for Zoe's wedding would take me years I didn't have to waste. The front door slammed open, followed by the familiar sound of Jerry's heavy footsteps. My son, 34 years old, had moved back in 6 months ago after his divorce, swearing it was temporary. Yet somehow temporary had become permanent, as it always did with Jerry. "Mom, I need to borrow your car tonight," he shouted from the hallway without even stepping into the kitchen. "Rebecca and I are going to look at that apartment in Riverside." Rebecca, the 26-year-old yoga instructor he'd been dating for barely 3 months. She used my living room as her meditation studio, left crystals scattered like breadcrumbs, and burned sage that set off my allergies. When I gently asked her to stop, Jerry had called me unwelcoming, stuck in the past. "Jerry," I called, my voice steady despite the rage simmering in my chest. "Can you come here, please?" He appeared in the doorway, irritation already etched across his face. His hair was a mess, his jeans, an expensive pair I had bought him last Christmas, hung low on his hips. "What's up?" "I'm in a hurry." I gestured at the statement spread across the table. "Did you know about this?" His eyes flicked to the paper, then quickly away, the same tell I'd spotted when he was 10 and sneaking cookies from the jar. "Know about what?" "Your sister charged $17,000 to my credit card for her wedding." Silence. Then a shrug that chilled me more than any shouted words could. "Yeah, she mentioned something about that." "Look, Mom, it's just money. You can afford it. And Zoe's been so stressed." "Just money." The words sliced through me. "Jerry, this was my entire emergency fund." It's a loan," he interrupted, examining his fingernails. She'll pay you back eventually. Besides, you've got the house, your pension. You're fine. I stared at him, this grown man I had raised, whose knees I'd bandaged, whose dreams I had nurtured, whose failures I had softened with my savings. A man who now lived under my roof, paying no rent, dismissing my security as trivial. My throat tightened. "Where's Zoe's engagement dinner?" I asked suddenly. Jerry froze. "What?" "The dinner. I never got an invitation." "When is it?" His pause stretched too long. "Oh, that. Yeah, they already had it. Just a small thing. You know how Zoe is about keeping it intimate." The lie hung thick between us, heavy and undeniable. 1,000 small exclusions replayed in my mind: birthdays I wasn't invited to, recitals I learned about on Facebook, family photos I wasn't included in because you never like how you look in pictures, Mom. Each memory stacked on the last until the weight of it pressed the air from my lungs. "I see," I whispered, folding the statement neatly, carefully. "And the wedding? Will I be attending that?" "Of course, Mom." "Don't be dramatic." Dramatic. As though wanting to be included in my own daughter's wedding was an act of theater. "Keys are on the hook," I said, my voice flat. "Please have the car back by midnight." Jerry grabbed them without a word. For a flicker of a moment, I thought he might apologize, might notice the fracture opening beneath our feet. Instead, he tossed over his shoulder, "Oh, and Rebecca's staying over tonight. We'll keep it down." The door slammed again, and the house sank into silence, leaving me with the credit card statement and the crushing truth: I had become a stranger in my own life. I drifted toward Donald's chair and sank into it, the worn leather familiar against my skin. Outside, the neighborhood carried on. Mrs. Duncan watered her garden. The Morrison kids rode their bikes in circles. Normal families living normal lives, while I sat alone, surrounded by the debris of a motherhood that had been repaid with indifference and exploitation. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Zoe: "Forgot to mention, can you handle the catering deposit for next month? It's only like $2,000. Dad's life insurance should cover it, right? You're the best." Only $2,000. Donald's life insurance. The money meant to carry me through my final years, to keep me safe when illness or age eventually claimed me. Already eaten away by medical bills, by Jerry's business opportunities, by Zoe's emergencies. Now, her fairy tale wedding. I stared at the message until the words blurred, then did something I had never done in 34 years of motherhood: I deleted it without replying. The silence that followed was deafening, but I realized it wasn't enough. Silence was just another form of surrender, another quiet yes to children who had forgotten how to hear no. As the last of the daylight dimmed and shadows crept across the room, I understood something with startling clarity. If my children valued me only for what I could provide, then it was time they learned what life looked like when that value was withdrawn. The statement crinkled in my hands as I folded it one final time. Tomorrow, I would make calls. Tonight, I would sit with Donald's ghost and remember what it felt like to be loved for who I was, not what I could give. For the first time in months, the silence in my house felt less like abandonment and more like possibility. The morning light felt like a blade, sharp and clean, slicing through the fog I had lived in for years, and by 7 I was showered, dressed, and ready to begin the quiet work of reclaiming my life. My hands didn't shake as I dialed the number on the back of the credit card because something in me had hardened overnight, not into bitterness but into bone-deep resolve, and when the representative answered I said, with the kind of calm that makes people lean in, "I need to report unauthorized charges, And I stated my name, my account, the dates, and vendors and totals until the sum of other people's choices lay neatly arranged like evidence on a courtroom table. The woman on the line was efficient and kind, the way people get when they recognize a storm has already happened and the least they can do is bring a towel. She walked me through the freeze, the disputes, the investigation, told me they might pursue the matter if the charges were found fraudulent, and I said, I understand. Because I did, truly, and then I called the bank and revoked Jerry's access with the same unshakable voice, answering verification questions I'd answered 1,000 times before but never with this sense that I was answering for myself, not for the role I'd been playing, and within minutes the card he used for temporary expenses was deactivated and the accounts he dipped into like neighborhood pools were closed to him forever. By 9 I sat in my car outside Riverside Elementary, the school where I'd taught third graders how to read maps and measure rectangles and apologize without excuses, and as minivans pulled through the drop-off lane and little hands clutched lunchboxes, my phone lit with Zoe's name, once, twice, 3 times, and on the 4th I answered because there was no point delaying the first inevitable collision. Mom, thank God, she blurted, frantic breath fogging the line, something's wrong with your credit card. The florist said the payment for the centerpieces was declined, and I said, the card has been frozen, as casually as if I were noting the weather, and she said, what? Why? The wedding is in 6 weeks, the venue wants the final payment Friday, and I said, I'm aware of the timeline, and there was a pause in which I could hear her constructing a version of me she hoped would return if she just spoke the right words, and when she tried them, Mom, please, just call and fix it, these are legitimate charges. I asked the question that mattered, are they? And let the silence do its work. She reminded me of the word emergencies, that malleable umbrella I'd held over their heads for decades, and I said, your wedding is not my emergency, and when she pivoted to the old trap, don't you want me to be happy? I stepped around it like a hole I finally saw and said, I want you to pay for your own wedding like adults do, and then I hung up because the conversation had reached the end of its usefulness. And when the phone rang again I powered it off and drove to the hardware store where the clerk with paper-thin skin and kind eyes loaded new locks into my cart and told me YouTube could teach me anything. At home Rebecca's yoga mat had unfurled itself across my living room like a flag planted on stolen land and the air smelled of burned sage and somebody else's certainty, and in the kitchen Rebecca was at my blender as if she'd bought the counter it sat on and Jerry was at my table as if he paid the taxes that kept it here, and he launched into his script without looking up. Mom, finally, my debit card isn't working and Zoe's freaking out, and I set my purse down and said, your access to my accounts has been revoked and I'm aware of your sister's situation, and Rebecca laughed lightly. That airy sound people produce when they believe reality is a negotiable instrument. Oh my God, Sandy, you scared us. Jerry thought maybe you were having a stroke making such weird financial decisions, and I breathed once, twice, very slowly, and said, Rebecca, please collect your things and leave, and she blinked at me as if I'd spoken a language invented on the spot. What? Why? And I said, because this is my home and you don't live here, and Jerry finally raised his head and said, Mom, stop, you're being ridiculous, Rebecca is welcome here, and I said, not anymore, and he did the thing he'd done since he was 12, the posture, the jaw, the dare, over what, some credit card mix-up? Zoe will pay you back, she always does. And I turned to him, not as a supplicant but as a mother who had finally learned the difference between love and rescue, and asked, when has she ever paid me back, Jerry? The car insurance? The deposit for her first apartment? The temporary loan for her master's? When? And his mouth moved but no words appeared and he said, that's different, that's what parents do, and I said, no, that's what I did, and the past tense cut the air clean. Rebecca set the blender lid down with exaggerated care and said, maybe I should go, and I said, yes, and Jerry's face flushed crimson and he grabbed for thunder, if she leaves, I leave too, and the threat that would once have cowed me landed with a soft thud on the tile, and I stirred my coffee and said, your choice, but if you leave you don't get to come back whenever it's convenient, and there was a flicker in his eyes, surprise at the unfamiliar landscape, and he softened his tone the way salesmen do when the first pitch fails. Mom, you're not like this, you're not cruel, you're the glue, and I said, I was, but glue works both ways and I'm done holding people together who will not hold themselves, and my phone buzzed where I'd set it face down. Zoe's name flashing like a lighthouse I no longer sailed toward, and Jerry said, Zoe's probably crying, the venue will cancel, and I said, then she should plan a wedding she can afford, and he stared at me for a long time like a mathematician confronted with an equation whose solution had always been there but hidden by his own handwriting, and he asked, what do you want from us? And the honest answer rose unforced, to be adults, to take responsibility, to stop treating me like an ATM with a kitchen, and he said, and if we don't, and I said, then you'll discover what life looks like without my money, and he grabbed his jacket and muttered that I was alienating the only people who loved me and slammed the door hard enough to rattle my new boundaries. And I finished my coffee because it was perfectly brewed, then carried the new locks in from the car and learned how to replace them with a tutorial and a screwdriver, each click of the deadbolt a punctuation mark in a sentence I was finally writing for myself. By 3 I'd tested every door twice, pocketed one new key and tucked the spare into the jewelry box beside Donald's ring, a circle of gold that had meant vow and shelter and work and tenderness, and at 4 I parked downtown and climbed the carpeted steps to Janet Morrison's office with its framed diplomas and walled books and smell of leather like old promises kept, and when she said my name her voice had the warmth people use at funerals and graduations, and I told her everything without flinching, the unauthorized charges and the exclusions and the language my children used when my utility failed to meet their needs. And she wrote notes and lifted her head to ask precise questions and finally said, Sandy, this may constitute financial elder abuse, and I said, quickly, almost automatically, I don't want to press criminal charges, I want them to face consequences, and she said, understood, then let's begin with your will, and we moved puzzle pieces until the picture looked like something I could live with, the house and half my assets to charities whose missions matched the hours I'd once poured into other people's children, the remainder to my own kids conditioned on repayment and time and decency. Executor duties moved from the son who framed entitlement as inevitability to the lawyer who wrote promises down where they could be found later, and she looked at me over her glasses like a doctor about to prescribe rest and said, are you prepared for the fallout? And the phone rang as if summoned by that question and Zoe's name shook the screen and I let it buzz until it died and said, they've been calling all day. Jerry left earlier with a flourish, he thinks I'll change my mind when loneliness sets in, and she asked, will you? And I waited, because the truth deserved the pause, and then said, no, and meant it in my bones. I left with a timeline for documents and a folder of instructions as thin as new ice but strong enough to hold me, and I stopped for groceries on the way home and bought only what I would cook for myself, a single chicken breast, green beans, lemons, and a bottle of wine I had saved for a celebration and decided this counted, and in the quiet kitchen I seasoned the pan and felt a peace that did not ask permission. The phone rang again and I answered because I was done dodging, and Jerry came through the line less certain, the edge gone from his voice. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot, Zoe's crying, the venue will cancel, I had to pay for dinner with quarters I found in the car, and it was almost comical, the way he assumed the wrong foot belonged to me, and I said, that sounds stressful. And he waited for the old me to appear with a solution, and when she didn't he said, you're acting like a stranger, and I said, maybe you never really knew me, and the silence grew something inside it that neither of us recognized, and he asked, so what now? And I said, we can talk anytime, but the conversation will be different, and when he asked how, I said, I won't be giving you money, solving your problems, or pretending that being used is the same as being loved. And he said, Jesus, Mom, you make us sound like criminals. And I didn't raise my voice when I asked, aren't you? And he breathed in and out like a man testing the cold at the edge of a lake and said, I need to think, and I said, take your time, and after he hung up the house returned to itself and I watched the light move across Donald's chair like a hand smoothing linen, and the locks clicked when I turned them and no one else's key fit, and that small fact, almost invisible from the street, felt like a mountain I had climbed without leaving my kitchen. The next morning began with the siege I had expected and prepared for, Zoe on the porch at dawn with mascara like war paint and a voice sandpapered by tears insisting the wedding was ruined and that I was doing this to her. And I brought my coffee outside and told her I wasn't doing anything to her, I was simply no longer doing everything for her, and she said the venue had cancelled. 2 years of planning were down the drain, and I asked what David thought and she answered too quickly that he didn't know because she hadn't told him about the money. And then she said the words that used to turn me inside out, just this once, help me, and I said, just this once is the phrase that has cost me 34 years, and I asked about the engagement dinner and about the calculus that had relocated me from family to funding, and when she tried to wedge herself back into safety with "I'll pay you back," I said, "No," and the word stood like a door I had closed and locked, and she called me a lonely old widow who would die alone, and then tried to put the words back in her mouth when she saw my hand move toward the knob, and I walked inside and turned the deadbolt and stood in the entryway breathing, not because I needed air but because I was savoring it, and she pounded and pleaded and threatened and finally left, and by noon the first emissary arrived, Jennifer with her careful hands and soft voice, and I made her coffee and told her the truth and watched recognition change the shape of her face. And after she left, David came in the afternoon with apology and concern and the first real responsibility I'd seen from anyone connected to this mess. And when he left, I understood that honesty could still exist inside this family system if you looked for it. And later Jerry called with threats about having me declared incompetent, and I laughed because I had documented every step and consulted counsel, and because there is a particular freedom in knowing the facts are finally on your side. And that night, alone at my table, I ate the dinner I had cooked for one and tasted the strange new flavor of a life that did not center other people's hunger. And when I went to bed, the quiet did not press on my chest, it lay beside me like a dog keeping watch, and I slept. I never thought betrayal could come dressed as love, but there it was, staring back at me in black and white. The credit card statement lay open on my kitchen table like a wound that refused to heal, each line of numbers cutting deeper than the last. $17,000. Not groceries, not a medical emergency, not anything resembling necessity. No, it was wedding flowers, catering deposits, venue fees, every expense neatly charged to the card I had foolishly added Zoe to 4 emergencies 3 years ago. My daughter's dream wedding built on my teacher's pension and what was left of Donald's life insurance. I traced my finger over the itemized charges, every figure a small betrayal. Enchanted Gardens florist, $3,200. Bella Vista Reception Hall, $8,500. Morrison's Catering, $4,800. The numbers blurred as my eyes welled, but I forced the tears back. At 62, I should have known better. By now, I should have learned that my children's love came with a price tag attached. The house groaned around me, cavernous and empty, filled only with the echoes of a family that had slowly, deliberately erased me from their lives. Donald's reading chair still sat by the window, untouched. For years had passed since he was taken from me, yet I had preserved everything exactly as it had been the day he died, partly from grief, partly from the desperate hope that maintaining the familiar might somehow keep me tethered to a time when I mattered. The phone buzzed against the granite countertop, the same countertop Donald had surprised me with on our 20th anniversary. A text from Zoe lit the screen. "Hey Mom. Can you pick up some groceries for us? Running late from wedding stuff. Just the usual. Thanks." The usual. As if I were her hired help. As if the $17,000 I had unknowingly funneled into her fantasy meant nothing. As if I meant nothing. I set the phone face down and stared again at the statement, running calculations in my head. My pension was $2,800 a month. After the mortgage, utilities, and groceries, I might have $400 left. At this rate, paying for Zoe's wedding would take me years, years I didn't have to waste. The front door slammed open, followed by the familiar sound of Jerry's heavy footsteps. My son, 34 years old, had moved back in 6 months ago after his divorce, swearing it was temporary. Yet somehow temporary had become permanent, as it always did with Jerry. "Mom, I need to borrow your car tonight," he shouted from the hallway without even stepping into the kitchen. "Rebecca and I are going to look at that apartment in Riverside." Rebecca, the 26-year-old yoga instructor he'd been dating for barely 3 months. She used my living room as her meditation studio, left crystals scattered like breadcrumbs, and burned sage that set off my allergies. When I gently asked her to stop, Jerry had called me unwelcoming, stuck in the past. "Jerry," I called, my voice steady despite the rage simmering in my chest. "Can you come here, please?" He appeared in the doorway, irritation already etched across his face. His hair was a mess, his jeans, an expensive pair I had bought him last Christmas, hung low on his hips. "What's up?" "I'm in a hurry." I gestured at the statement spread across the table. Did you know about this? His eyes flicked to the paper, then quickly away, the same tell I'd spotted when he was 10 and sneaking cookies from the jar. Know about what? Your sister charged $17,000 to my credit card for her wedding. Silence. Then a shrug that chilled me more than any shouted words could. Yeah, she mentioned something about that. Look, Mom, it's just money. You can afford it. And Zoe's been so stressed. Just money. The words sliced through me. Jerry, this was my entire emergency fund. It's a loan, he interrupted, examining his fingernails. She'll pay you back eventually. Besides, you've got the house, your pension. You're fine. I stared at him, this grown man I had raised, whose knees I'd bandaged, whose dreams I had nurtured, whose failures I had softened with my savings. A man who now lived under my roof, paying no rent, dismissing my security as trivial. My throat tightened. Where's Zoe's engagement dinner? I asked suddenly. Jerry froze. What? The dinner. I never got an invitation. When is it? His pause stretched too long. Oh, that. Yeah, they already had it. Just a small thing. You know how Zoe is about keeping it intimate. The lie hung thick between us, heavy and undeniable. 1,000 small exclusions replayed in my mind, birthdays I wasn't invited to, recitals I learned about on Facebook, family photos I wasn't included in because you never like how you look in pictures, Mom. Each memory stacked on the last until the weight of it pressed the air from my lungs. I see, I whispered, folding the statement neatly, carefully. And the wedding? Will I be attending that? Of course, Mom. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic. As though wanting to be included in my own daughter's wedding was an act of theater. Keys are on the hook, I said, my voice flat. Please have the car back by midnight. Jerry grabbed them without a word. For a flicker of a moment, I thought he might apologize, might notice the fracture opening beneath our feet. Instead, he tossed over his shoulder, oh, and Rebecca's staying over tonight. We'll keep it down. The door slammed again, and the house sank into silence, leaving me with the credit card statement and the crushing truth. I had become a stranger in my own life. I drifted toward Donald's chair and sank into it, the worn leather familiar against my skin. Outside, the neighborhood carried on. Mrs. Duncan watered her garden. The Morrison kids rode their bikes in circles. Normal families living normal lives, while I sat alone, surrounded by the debris of a motherhood that had been repaid with indifference and exploitation. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Zoe, forgot to mention, can you handle the catering deposit for next month? It's only like $2,000. Dad's life insurance should cover it, right? You're the best. Only $2,000. Donald's life insurance. The money meant to carry me through my final years, to keep me safe when illness or age eventually claimed me. Already eaten away by medical bills, by Jerry's business opportunities, by Zoe's emergencies. Now, her fairy tale wedding. I stared at the message until the words blurred, then did something I had never done in 34 years of motherhood. I deleted it without replying. The silence that followed was deafening, but I realized it wasn't enough. Silence was just another form of surrender, another quiet yes to children who had forgotten how to hear no. As the last of the daylight dimmed and shadows crept across the room, I understood something with startling clarity. If my children valued me only for what I could provide, then it was time they learned what life looked like when that value was withdrawn. The statement crinkled in my hands as I folded it one final time. Tomorrow, I would make calls. Tonight, I would sit with Donald's ghost and remember what it felt like to be loved for who I was, not what I could give. For the first time in months, the silence in my house felt less like abandonment and more like possibility. The third morning came without dread, and that alone felt like a miracle, because for the first time in decades I woke without bracing myself for somebody else's problem to become mine. The sun carved thin gold lines across the curtains, And instead of rolling over with that familiar ache of obligation, I stood up, stretched, and thought about what I wanted to do with my day, a question I hadn't asked myself in years. By the time I'd dressed and brewed coffee, the knock came at the door. It was softer than Jerry's pounding or Zoe's frantic fists, and when I opened it, I found Mrs. Duncan from 2 houses down holding a casserole dish in her hands like an offering. "I don't mean to intrude," she said, her voice tentative, but I heard raised voices the other morning and then saw a young man storm out with bags. "I just wanted to make sure you're all right." Elizabeth Duncan. I'd watched her tend her roses for years without ever doing more than wave. Now here she was, bridging a gap I hadn't even realized had grown so wide. "I'm fine," I began automatically, then stopped myself. That word, fine, had become my armor, but it was also my cage. "Actually," I corrected, "I'm having a difficult week. But I'm handling it." Her eyes softened. "Would you like some company while you handle it? I made too much lasagna." And that's how, 40 minutes later, we were sitting at my kitchen table, my table, cleared of Jerry's clutter, free from Rebecca's crystals, sharing her excellent lasagna and a bottle of Pinot Grigio I'd been saving for an occasion I couldn't name until now. Elizabeth was a widow too, 3 years since cancer had taken her husband. She spoke of her children living across the country, of Sunday calls that felt more like scheduled tasks than genuine connection, and when she said, "Sometimes I think they're just checking off a box," called Mom, done, I found myself nodding. "At least they call," I admitted before guilt tried to silence me. But something about her gaze gave me permission, and the words spilled out, the exclusions, the dinners I wasn't invited to, the credit card charges, the way Zoe had reframed theft as punishment, the way Jerry had threatened loneliness as if it were a weapon. Elizabeth listened the way people do when they've been there themselves, no judgment, just steady acknowledgement. When I finished, she asked, "How do you feel now that you've set boundaries?" I wanted to say strong. I wanted to say liberated. Instead I said, terrified. Relieved. And guilty for feeling relieved. She smiled knowingly. "The guilt will fade. The relief will grow." Her certainty was a lifeline, and I clung to it. That evening, after she left, I washed the wine glasses and found myself humming. The quiet of the house wasn't oppressive anymore, it was restful. But peace never lasted long in a life my children were determined to control. My phone buzzed again, Zoe's number. Against my better judgment, I read the message, "Mom, please call me back. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. I'm sorry if I upset you, but please don't punish me for using the card. You said it was for emergencies." I showed the message to Elizabeth when she stopped by the next day. She scanned it and said, "Notice how she phrases it, sorry if she upset you. Not sorry for what she did. That's not remorse, that's manipulation." I hadn't even noticed the phrasing until she pointed it out. Still playing the victim. Still shifting blame. And for the first time I saw it too. That afternoon, I deleted the message without responding. My silence was not compliance anymore, it was a choice. Days slipped into a fragile rhythm. Coffee with Elizabeth, walks around the neighborhood, tending the garden I'd neglected for years. Each small act felt like reclaiming something lost. But the siege wasn't over. It returned on a Thursday morning when I opened my front door to find Zoe on the porch, pale and hollow-eyed. She must have been sitting there since dawn. "Mom," she croaked, mascara smeared, "we need to talk." "Good morning, Zoe," I said evenly. She staggered to her feet. "The venue cancelled. The payment didn't go through. 2 years of planning, ruined. I don't understand why you're doing this to me." I held her gaze. "I'm not doing anything to you. I'm simply not doing everything for you anymore." Her face crumpled. "David doesn't know," she admitted. "I haven't told him about the money. He thinks everything's fine." My heart clenched, not with sympathy, but with recognition of the pattern. "Hide the truth, pass the burden to me, let me carry the weight. Then perhaps it's time David knows who he's marrying," I said quietly. She gasped like I'd struck her. Please, Mom. Just this once. Help me fix this. Just this once, the phrase that had been the prelude to every sacrifice I'd ever made. No, I said, and the word felt like a key turning in a lock I hadn't known existed. She blinked. What do you mean no? I mean no. I will not fix this for you. Her eyes filled, but the tears were sharp, angry. So what, you'll abandon me? Let me fail? Let me be humiliated in front of everyone? You are 31 years old, Zoe. Old enough to plan a wedding. Old enough to face the consequences of planning one you can't afford. She flinched like the truth was louder than my voice. Then came the cruelty. You're just a lonely old widow, driving away the only people who love you. You'll die alone, and it will be your own fault. I felt the sting, yes. But I also felt something else, clarity. This was her weapon. Fear of abandonment, sharpened into a blade. Goodbye, Zoe, I said, stepping inside. She panicked then, backpedaling, her voice breaking. I didn't mean it. I'm just scared. Please. But I closed the door. Turned the deadbolt. And stood there, breathing in the silence that now felt like strength. She pounded for several minutes, alternating between sobs and threats, before finally leaving. I didn't watch her drive away. I didn't need to. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing after anyone. 3 weeks later, the quiet in my house felt almost holy. No slammed doors, no footsteps demanding favors, no texts vibrating with entitlement. The garden, once neglected, was blooming under my hands, and Elizabeth had become a constant presence, coffee in the mornings, walks in the evenings, laughter echoing through a kitchen that had forgotten the sound. It was in that quiet that David's car pulled into my driveway. He looked thinner, wearier, but his eyes were steady. Mrs. Patterson, he said when I opened the door, I thought you deserved the truth. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $8,500, half of the reversed wedding charges. I can't accept this, I said instinctively, but he shook his head. Yes, you can. I benefited from that money, even if I didn't know where it came from. It's my responsibility. He told me he had called off the wedding. That when he asked Zoe to be honest about finances, about family, about respect, she accused him of being manipulated by me. She said you were a bitter old woman who couldn't stand to see her daughter happy, he admitted quietly, shame lacing his voice. I braced myself for the sting, but the wound had already scarred. And what did you say? I asked. He sighed. I said if she couldn't see the way she was treating you, then maybe we weren't ready for marriage. Relief, not sorrow, filled his face. Strange, he added, I feel lighter. I nodded. Sometimes the hardest truth is also the most freeing. After he left, I sat on the back patio, Donald's roses swaying gently in the breeze, the check lying on the table like proof that respect still existed in the world. My phone buzzed. Elizabeth. How did it go with David? She texted. I smiled. He's a good man. He did the right thing. That evening, as I read on the porch, headlights swept across my driveway. A car I didn't recognize. Zoe stepped out, hair unkempt, clothes wrinkled, followed by another young woman who lingered by the curb. Zoe stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Mom, she began, her voice raw, we need to talk. I nodded politely to the companion. This is Melissa, Zoe said quickly. My college roommate. I'm staying on her couch. Mom, please, I have nowhere else to go. I need to come home. The words were familiar, inevitable. When all else failed, return to the mother who always said yes. But I was no longer that mother. No, I said, steady and final. Zoe blinked. What do you mean, no? This is my home too. I met her eyes. It was your home. But you made it clear I wasn't family when you excluded me from your engagement dinner. This isn't your home anymore. Melissa shifted uncomfortably. Maybe I should wait in the car, she murmured. Maybe you should, I agreed. She retreated, leaving Zoe and me under the porch light. Zoe's bravado cracked. Please, Mom. I know I've made mistakes. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I used your card, I'm sorry I didn't invite you, I'm sorry I said those things about you dying alone. The words spilled out, but they felt rehearsed, transactional, like currency offered for entry. What are you sorry for, Zoe? I asked quietly. She frowned. I just told you. No. You told me what you did. I'm asking what you're sorry for. Confusion flickered across her face. She didn't understand the difference between regretting consequences and regretting choices. You're playing word games, she snapped. I shook my head. I'm trying to have a conversation with my daughter. But I'm beginning to think that person doesn't exist anymore. Silence fell, heavy and sharp. For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes, recognition, perhaps, but it vanished as quickly as it came. So what now? She asked bitterly. We just don't have a relationship anymore? We can, I said, but it will be different. Based on respect, not dependency. On honesty, not manipulation. She turned away, her shoulders rigid, and walked back to Melissa's car without another word. I watched them drive off, and to my surprise, I felt no grief. Only peace. The next morning, Jerry called. His voice was low, almost cautious. Zoe told me what happened. Mom, this is insane. She's your daughter. I took a breath. She's an adult. She made adult choices. And now she faces adult consequences. He was silent for a long time before saying, so that's it? You're done with us? I let the question settle. I'm done being used. There's a difference. His tone softened. What if we change? What if we pay you back? Treat you better? It was the first time either of them had even suggested the possibility of change. My heart ached, but I held firm. Then we'll see. But change has to be real. Not words designed to win back my resources. Real. He asked, almost childlike, how do we prove it? I closed my eyes, picturing Donald's empty chair, Elizabeth's knowing smile, the roses blooming despite years of neglect. You don't prove it to me. You prove it to yourselves. By becoming the kind of people who don't need to prove it. After we hung up, I sat in that chair and looked around at the life I had begun to rebuild. The garden was thriving. The house was clean. Elizabeth's lasagna dish still sat on the counter, waiting to be returned. And in that moment, I realized something profound. I was no longer waiting for my children to change before I could live. I was living already. The days that followed felt like a strange kind of freedom, the kind that makes you check over your shoulder as though someone might come to take it back, but no one did. The locks clicked firmly when I turned the key, the house smelled of lemon and fresh air instead of incense and smoke, and my mornings began not with panic but with coffee and the rustle of Elizabeth's footsteps on the walkway between our houses. We had fallen into a rhythm, she'd bring her mug, I'd bring mine, and together we'd sit on my porch talking about books, gardens, the absurdity of widowhood, and the secret relief that came with finally being honest about loneliness. But underneath the quiet, I knew the siege wasn't over. My children had learned too well that guilt and fear were weapons, and they weren't going to lay them down easily. On the third Sunday, the phone rang again, Zoe's name flashing across the screen like an alarm. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice was cracked, raw, the edges frayed from sleepless nights. Mom, please. I can't do this anymore. David's gone, the wedding's off, I'm staying on Melissa's couch, and I don't know what to do. She paused as though waiting for me to crumble. I need you. Please let me come home. I gripped the receiver tightly, my heart aching at the desperation, but I heard Elizabeth's voice in my head, notice the wording. So I asked, what do you need from me, Zoe? A place to stay or someone to fix everything? Her silence was telling. I don't know, she finally whispered. Then figure it out, I said softly. Because if you come back here, it won't be like before. No secret charges. No exclusions. No manipulation. Respect, or nothing at all. She broke then, sobbing into the phone, but I held my ground. I had spent decades teaching her that tears erased consequences. It was time to teach her that consequences could survive even her crying. That afternoon, Elizabeth and I walked the neighborhood, our shadows stretching long in the late summer sun. She'll try again, Elizabeth said knowingly. And she'll bring reinforcements. She was right. By Wednesday, Jerry appeared at my door, alone this time. His bravado was gone, replaced by something else, defensiveness wrapped in false humility. "Mom, look," he began, not meeting my eyes. "I know things got heated. But we're family. We can work this out." I led him into the living room, watched him sit where Rebecca used to lounge, his knee bouncing nervously. "Work it out how?" I asked. "You moving back in? Me paying your bills? Zoe draining what little I have left?" He winced. "That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed softly. Fair would have been asking permission before spending $17,000. Fair would have been inviting me to my daughter's engagement dinner. Fair would have been paying rent while living in my home. He swallowed hard. "I'm trying, Mom. I really am. I got a lead on a job last week. Rebecca and we're not together anymore." He said it like an apology, like I should be proud of him. "I hope that's true," I replied evenly. "But change isn't about words, Jerry. It's about action. You've promised before." His face crumpled. "So what, you don't believe me?" "I'll believe it when I see it." For once, he didn't explode. He just sat there, his hands trembling slightly, then stood. "I'll prove it," he muttered before leaving. I closed the door behind him, my pulse steady. Progress, perhaps. Or another performance. Either way, the difference was this: I no longer needed to rescue him. That night, Elizabeth came by with a pie. We sat at the table, the air filled with the scent of cinnamon, and she asked, "Do you ever think they'll truly change?" I stared at the flickering candle between us. "I don't know. But for the first time, I know I can survive even if they don't." And that truth settled over me like a blanket, warm and solid. The next morning, as I pruned Donald's roses, I felt something I hadn't in years: anticipation. Not dread of the next demand, not fear of abandonment, but anticipation of my own life, of what I might build now that I was no longer busy holding up everyone else's. The war with my children wasn't over, but the battleground had shifted. It was no longer about what they could take from me. It was about whether they would learn who I really was when I finally said no. The following week tested me in ways I hadn't yet faced, because silence is one kind of battle and confrontation is another, but manipulation delivered through the voices of others cuts deeper than either. It began on Thursday afternoon when the doorbell rang and I opened it to find Jennifer again, her expression uneasy. "Jerry asked me to talk to you," she admitted, shifting from one foot to the other. "He says you've cut him off completely, that you're pushing him away. He's worried about you." I invited her in, poured coffee, and told her what I had already told her once before, the truth. This time, though, I saw something different in her eyes: recognition. She had been married to Jerry long enough to know his patterns, to know how easily he spun narratives that placed him as victim and savior at the same time. "I don't want to be in the middle," she said finally, "but I think you're right. He always relied on someone else to clean up the mess." She left soon after, and I felt strangely lighter, as if an invisible jury had returned a quiet verdict in my favor. By evening, the next emissary arrived. David again, but this time without Zoe's shadow looming over him. He carried himself with the air of a man who had made a decision. "I thought you should know," he said as we sat on the back porch. I ended it. For good this time. We were supposed to talk about rescheduling the wedding, maybe something smaller, but when I suggested honesty, counseling, compromise, she exploded. "She said you had poisoned me against her." And that's when I realized, if asking for honesty feels like poison to her, then we have no future. His words were heavy but steady, and when he slid a folded receipt across the table, I blinked in confusion. I made another payment toward what Zoe spent, he said simply. I can't undo everything, but I can do something. Gratitude welled in me, not for the money itself but for the accountability it represented, something my own children had yet to show. The very next morning, though, the storm escalated. I woke to pounding on the door, the kind that rattles glass, and when I opened it Zoe was there again, her hair wild, her eyes bloodshot. Mom, she cried, you don't understand, David left me, the venue cancelled, I've got nothing. You're all I have left. Please. She reached for me, and for a heartbeat I wanted to pull her into my arms the way I had when she was little, scraped knees and trembling lip. But then I remembered Elizabeth's words, remembered Jennifer's nod of recognition, remembered David's quiet apology. I steadied my voice. Zoe, you have a job. You have a degree. You have options. What you don't have is the right to use me anymore. She froze, then her face twisted. So what, you just stop being my mother? The accusation hit like a stone, but I stood tall. No. I am still your mother. That's why I'm teaching you this. Because no one else will. She broke then, collapsing onto the porch steps, sobbing so loudly the neighbors peeked through curtains. For years, that display would have shattered me. But this time, I let her cry. I didn't rescue. I didn't soothe. I sat in Donald's chair by the window and let the storm rage outside. When she finally left, slamming the car door and spinning gravel, the silence that followed felt like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. Later that night, Elizabeth came over with a pot of tea and listened as I recounted the scene. She's going to escalate, she warned. When tears don't work, threats will. And when threats don't work, she'll send others. You need to be ready. I nodded, knowing she was right. The war wasn't over. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the next battle. I was prepared. Because the truth, as painful as it was, had already begun to set me free. The days that followed her outburst on my porch were eerily calm, like the air before a thunderstorm, heavy with tension and the certainty that something was coming. And it did. On Monday morning, as I watered Donald's roses, a car pulled into the driveway and out stepped two people I had not expected, my sister-in-law Carol and her husband Mark. Their smiles were stiff, their voices syrupy with false concern. Sandy, Carol began, clasping my hands as if we were at a funeral, we've been hearing some troubling things. The kids say you're not yourself lately. Freezing accounts, changing locks, shutting them out. We're worried about you. The script was familiar. Zoe had sent new messengers, this time armed with family ties and whispered insinuations about my mental state. I see, I said quietly, guiding them inside. We sat at the kitchen table, and I let them speak, let them circle me with words like loneliness and grief and poor judgment. They thought they were laying traps, but all I saw was a pattern, more voices trying to bend me back into the shape I had lived in for decades. When they finally paused, I set down my teacup and met Carol's eyes. It's interesting, I said, how concerned everyone suddenly is now that the money is gone. Where was this concern when I wasn't invited to birthdays, or dinners, or my daughter's engagement party? Where was this concern when Jerry and Rebecca lived here rent-free, or when Zoe drained my savings without asking? Their faces flushed, and Mark cleared his throat. We're just saying, family is family. I smiled then, but it was a tired smile. Exactly. And family doesn't use each other as banks. So unless you came here to listen rather than lecture, this conversation is over. They left soon after, stiff-backed and muttering. The moment the door closed, the silence that followed was a bomb. That evening, Elizabeth joined me for dinner, bringing over roasted chicken and her quiet, steady presence. As we ate, I told her about Carol and Mark, about their rehearsed sympathy and veiled accusations. She chuckled, shaking her head. Of course. When manipulation fails, they recruit. It's not about helping you, Sandy. It's about preserving their access. Remember that. Her clarity was a gift, and I tucked it away like armor point. 2 days later, the battlefront shifted again. Jerry called, his tone stripped of anger but weighted with something else, fear. "Mom, I need to talk to you," he said. "Can I come by?" Against my better instincts, I agreed. He arrived alone, his shoulders slumped, his face pale. "I lost the job lead," he admitted, sinking into a chair. "And Zoe, she's not talking to me. She says I didn't defend her." He buried his face in his hands. For a fleeting moment, I saw the boy he used to be, scraped knees and trembling lip. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. My heart ached, but I remembered the line I had drawn. "You figure it out, Jerry. Like adults do." He lifted his head, eyes red. "So you're really not going to help? Not even this once?" I shook my head slowly. "No more, just this once. You need to learn to help yourself." For a long moment, the only sound was the tick of the clock. Finally, Jerry stood. "You've changed," he said, his voice sharp again, trying to wound. But instead of flinching, I nodded. "Yes. I have." And I watched him leave, closing the door behind him. That night, as I sat by Donald's chair, I realized something profound. I was no longer afraid of their anger. No longer afraid of their absence. The love I had begged for, paid for, sacrificed for all those years, it had never been love at all. And the emptiness I once feared was not emptiness at all. It was space. Space for peace, for friendship, for roses blooming under careful hands. Space, finally, for me. 3 weeks after Jerry's visit, the phone calls slowed, the knocks at the door faded, and the house settled into a rhythm that felt wholly mine. I rose with the sun, tended the roses, met Elizabeth for morning coffee, and returned to a life I hadn't realized was waiting for me. But peace is never left unchallenged when those who once fed on you grow hungry. On a Friday afternoon, as I was folding laundry in the quiet, a message came from Zoe. "Mom, I really need to see you. Please don't shut me out. I promise this isn't about money." Against my better judgment, I agreed. That evening, she appeared at my door, alone, no mascara streaks, no performative sighs. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, her voice quieter than I remembered. "Mom," she said, "I just wanted to talk. Without fighting." We sat at the table, and for a long moment she said nothing, her eyes darting to the countertop, the cupboards, anywhere but me. Finally, she whispered, "David's gone. For good. And I know it's my fault." My chest tightened, not with sympathy, but with the strange relief that came when truth finally slipped out unguarded. "He said I lied too much. That I took advantage of people. That I used you." She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. Was he right? The question hung in the air, fragile and sharp. I folded my hands. "Yes, Zoe. He was." She flinched, but to her credit, she didn't argue. Instead, she let out a long, shaky breath. "I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to be different." My instinct was to reach for her, to cradle her like I had when she was little. But I knew that wasn't what she needed anymore. "You start by taking responsibility," I said gently. "By living within your means. By treating people as people, not as resources. That's the only way forward." Her eyes searched mine, desperate. "So if I do that, will you forgive me?" Forgiveness. That word I had carried like a burden, given out too freely, used as currency. I thought of the years of exclusions, the lies, the thefts, the way she weaponized loneliness against me. And I thought of Elizabeth's lasagna, of David's quiet apology, of the roses finally blooming again. "Forgiveness isn't a door I can open for you, Zoe," I said softly. "It's a path you have to walk. If you walk it, maybe one day we'll meet on it. But you have to walk it first." She cried then, quietly, without theatrics. And when she left, she didn't slam the door. She closed it gently, as though she understood something was fragile inside. That night, I called Elizabeth, told her what had happened. She listened, then asked, "Do you feel hopeful?" I considered it. "I feel steady," I admitted. "Hopeful if she changes. Peaceful if she doesn't." Elizabeth's smile through the phone was audible. "That's growth, Sandy. That's power." And as I lay in bed, the silence surrounding me was no longer the silence of absence. It was the silence of possibility, humming with the life I was finally choosing. The final test came on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of quiet day when the breeze carried the scent of cut grass and the neighborhood children played in driveways. I was sitting on the porch with Elizabeth, sipping iced tea, when Jerry's car pulled into the driveway. He stepped out slowly, no swagger this time, no rehearsed lines. Just a man who looked older than his years, shoulders sagging under a weight he had built himself. Zoe was with him, standing a few steps behind, her face pale but composed. They approached together, hesitant, like children called to the principal's office. "Mom," Jerry began, his voice low, "we came to apologize." I didn't speak, just let the silence stretch, because silence had become my ally. "We've been talking," he continued, glancing at Zoe, "and we realized, we've treated you like a safety net, not a mother. We took advantage. We pushed you aside when we didn't need you, and pulled you close when we wanted something." Zoe swallowed hard. "David's gone. The wedding's gone. And I see now. I ruined it. I hurt you. I hurt myself. I don't know if I can fix it, but I'm sorry." Her voice cracked on the last word, not in manipulation this time, but in something raw and unpolished. I studied their faces, looking for the performance, the trick, the angle. But for the first time in years, I didn't see entitlement. I saw exhaustion. I saw the weight of choices pressing down. "Words are easy," I said at last. "What matters is what you do next. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be built on respect. No more lies. No more using me. You live your lives, you make your choices, and you carry your own consequences. Only then can we have something real." Jerry nodded slowly, as if he had been waiting for that condition all along. Zoe wiped her eyes. "I don't know if I can be that person yet. But I want to try." And with that, they left, not with slammed doors or shouted threats, but with quiet steps and lowered heads. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was the first time the future felt like it might hold more than battles. That evening, as the sun bled gold across the sky, I sat with Elizabeth on the porch. We talked about roses, about books, about the strange and beautiful courage it takes to choose yourself after decades of being chosen last. And as twilight settled, I realized something profound. I was no longer defined by what I had given away. I was defined by what I had kept, my dignity, my peace, my worth. So to you watching, I ask this: what do you think of my story? Have you ever reached the point where silence turned into strength, where no became the most powerful word you could say? Share your thoughts with me in the comments below. Because maybe, just maybe, by telling our stories, we remind each other that we are worth far more than what others take from us. The 10th week did not bring riches or celebration, it brought silence. A silence so profound that it felt like standing at the edge of a vast ocean, the roar of waves replaced by the gentle hush of my own breath. After leaving that house, after leaving the storm of accusations and demands, I walked into a new chapter of my life. I did not look back. I did not wonder if they would call, if they would change, if one day they might rediscover love. I had spent too many nights hoping for a transformation that would never come. Now, I placed my hope not in them, but in myself. I went back to Martha's home and handed her the ticket. Her eyes widened in shock, but before she could protest, I smiled and said, "Keep it for me. Not because I want you to use it, but because I want to remind myself that trust still exists in this world. And if there is anyone I can trust, it is you." She hesitated, then placed her hand over mine and whispered, "Cassie, family isn't who you're born with. It's who chooses you. And I choose you. Charlotte hugged me tightly, and for the first time in months, I cried, not out of despair, but out of relief. The tears were a cleansing, washing away months of betrayal, of pain, of anger. In their arms, I felt something I had been searching for all along: belonging. Not because of money, not because of obligation, but because of love freely given. In the days that followed, I started to rebuild. I woke early and opened the curtains to let sunlight flood in. I cooked small meals and ate them slowly, savoring each bite instead of choking down food between waves of anxiety. I took walks with Charlotte, laughing at the smallest things, rediscovering how it felt to simply live. The shadows of my family's betrayal still lingered, but they no longer dictated my every thought. They were scars, not open wounds. One afternoon, as I sat by the window with a cup of tea, I thought about the ticket again. $47 million, a number so large it could drown anyone who stared too long. But I realized something: the real lottery had not been the winning numbers. It had been the revelation. Without that slip of paper, I might never have seen their true faces. I might have lived the rest of my life under illusions, believing in a family that did not exist. The ticket had stripped away lies, and though it hurt, it freed me. I never cashed it. People might think that's foolish, that I wasted the chance of a lifetime. But for me, the real chance of a lifetime was learning who I could become without it. Strengthened by pain, sharpened by truth, softened by real love. That was worth more than any millions. Sometimes I wonder if they still talk about me, if they still spin stories about the sister, the daughter, the mother who betrayed them. Let them. Their words are no longer chains. They are echoes fading into the distance. I live here, in the present, surrounded by people who see me not as a wallet, not as a prize, but as Cassie. Just Cassie. And so this is where my story ends, not with revenge, not with wealth, but with freedom. Freedom from the weight of expectations, freedom from the cruelty of blood ties that never truly bound us, freedom to choose love where it is real. To everyone listening now, I want to leave you with a question: what does family mean to you? Is it the people you share blood with, or is it the people who show up when the world falls apart? I found my answer, but I want to hear yours. Tell me in the comments below, what would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have shared the winnings, or would you have walked away like I did? Your thoughts, your stories, they matter, because maybe together we can redefine what family truly is.